Well, students, welcome to the first edition of Distance Learning for Figure Drawing 2 in the spring semester. Um, I wanted to try to, I thought it just might be helpful, maybe a little comforting if you could hear my voice over these slides, and I could just have a little bit of a chat with you, I guess, about our direction forward. So, at any rate, obviously there are the obvious problem that we have is that we can't be with one another, and secondly, that we won't have live models each class. And although that is, something that'll be missed, um, there is another aspect that was typical to this course, which was that students often in homework drawings used themselves as models, um, doing self-portraits, focusing on the facial features, also doing full bodies, both draped and undraped. Um, so, uh, we can proceed moving forward, doing some of those things and maybe some other sort of interesting technique sorts of assignments. However, in this particular instance, I thought that this situation we're uh, in isolation and social distancing and so forth, presented an opportunity to not only explore drawing the human figure, but also to explore elements of the particular condition we're in. I think it sets up a very unique situation for subject matter. And so I thought, at least to kick things off, we might try to mine a little of whatever we have going on in our little spaces and apply it to the drawings that we make. Um, Part of the reason I feel confident that you can do this is that the three of you all draw the figure very well. Um, I think you're very competent, and I think that you're ready to branch out and begin to put the figure in some other sort of context other than just, standing or seated or lying on a table. So that said, what I'd like to do is explore having you do a self-portrait in an environmental space that is yours at this point. Wherever it is you are sort of existing, living, working, socializing, uh, whatever that space looks like. And also to maybe think a little bit about the way that you're feeling relative to that space. Does it feel, very confining, or is it feel secure, uh, or insecure, or whatever feelings it sort of conjures up? Might be anxiety. I know I'm feeling all of those things, and quite frankly, I miss you. So that said, I want to provide you with a little bit of information relative to a couple. So Edward Hopper is an American artist who worked. He sort of came of age through the 20s and 30s, and by the 40s was a pretty well-known artist. And he did buck some traditions of American art, namely that in the late 40s, abstraction was emerging as a dominant uh, movement in American art, and Hopper remained, fairly traditional in terms of his painting. But one of the hallmarks of Hopper's work is that he used a very American landscape. He used very American buildings. He used the places that he visited, where he lived. He traveled a little bit around the country. He took road trips and stayed in motels and things like that. And he often use these things for subject matter. And kind of one of the hallmarks of most of his work is that there are often singular figures in isolation within the paintings. And if they're not a singular figure, if there are more than one figure, they're often somehow weirdly detached from one another. So, critics and writers who have written about Hopper always sort of talk about that, this sort of feeling of loneliness and isolation that comes into his work. So, I'm gonna show you in this PowerPoint. I've just got a number of slides where you can see his work, and and like I said, most of these paintings were done in the 40s, maybe late 30s, and are definitely a product of the time. I think Hopper was a man who had experienced the end of World War One and had experienced the Great Depression and an impending war in the 40s, which was World War II. And I think his own anxieties helped to produce the kinds of imagery that he created. So he's a fitting guy to kind of take a look at in this time and place. So here's a few of these images. One of the other things that Hopper did quite well was to use light and shadow very effectively as a tool. In a lot of these paintings, you'll find really, really strong light sources, either via sunlight or artificial light if they're sort of nighttime scenes. And his compositions are very simplistic and are, I think, among the best in American art. He really knows how to create space in an interesting fashion, and again, I think the sort of mood that's set by these are they're quite remarkable. So this image you're looking at right now was probably done on Cape Cod, where he had a home, and he often used his wife as a model for these paintings, and he was a very, very apt to use many drawings in preparation for doing a painting. This is a typical sort of night scene that Hopper would do, and again, it's got this sort of element of like voyeurism, maybe, where you're looking into a window and maybe you shouldn't be. You don't quite know what's happening on the other side. It's a little bit vague, but once again, there's a solitary figure, and I would like you to sort of pay attention to the little details he adds, like the curtain blowing in the wind on the left-hand side, and just compositionally how he offsets that curtain that's got a hint of blue in it with the red in the far right-hand window. This is another interior, and again, a singular figure, a landscape seen out the window. The sunlight and shadow play on the windowsill and the floor are, really interesting compositional elements and kind of direct your eye across. And I just want you to pay attention to all the rectangles, the windows, the light on the floor is a rectangle, and then he uses that table at the left as another rectangle to anchor the composition, but also to create extra pictorial space, which means the cropping of that table sort of implies that it goes off the edge and leads the viewer to believe there's space beyond what is actually portrayed. And also, putting something in the foreground like that and then folding the middle ground behind it, which is the figure and the table and the flowers and the windows, it creates another stage. So you have foreground, table, middle ground, and then this big background of city buildings. So, that's just an element that you could use, and Hopper uses it a lot. I'll show you in the this next slide. He does it again, puts this table in the foreground. And it's a similar kind of image, just a woman, this time nude, looking out a window. You don't see what she's looking at, which creates a little bit of mystery. She also seems very relaxed and sort of, just there. And it sort of creates a little bit of tension between the nudity and the fact that she's just kind of like gazing out the window. And again, he sets this thing up compositionally with a strong foreground, folds the space back where the figure is, and then gives you a glimpse of something out the window. In this case, it's not quite as dominant as the last painting we looked at. Again, another in the same genre. This time, a draped figure on a clean bed and gazing out the window. Sunlight and shadow play a strong role here. This time he doesn't necessarily give you the foreground plane, but the bed pillow sort of serves as that little anchor for the extra pictorial space. This is a more this is the other viewpoint. This is outside looking in, much like the one we looked at a few slides back where he was looking into the apartment window. So this is looking at this house and at a figure in a doorway. And again, is the person waiting for someone? Are they looking at something? You never quite know what's happening with the figure. And the background space is just so large and clean and open. It seems almost Midwestern. I'm sure that this, however, probably is also done on Cape Cod. So anyway, that's a little bit of the flavor of Hopper. Now I sort of would like to move toward his preparation for doing these paintings. So Hopper was a very studied artist, and he would do, I think he got ideas. I mean, you can watch interviews with him, and he talks about this. He would get an idea, and he would often find a site or use real things in the creation of the paintings. But he did lots and lots of drawings beforehand, and he made often, and I'll show you in a later slide, color notations, and he would revise these drawings over several iterations before determining what the composition was finally going to be. So in this slide you see a preparatory drawing and what happens in the final painting. And I guess some of the differences are, obviously in the drawing, at least initially, he has the figures looking at one another. And when he finally evolves this into a painting, here comes the detachment. They're no longer looking at one another. The girl's looking at the floor sort of in a detached manner, and the male figures, looking at her, but not directly at her face, where they were definitely engaged face to face in the initial drawing. This is another example of a preparatory drawing and a finished painting side by side. And the most obvious feature in this is the chair is missing from the corner of the room, and a large swath of drapery, which was included in the original drawing, has been replaced by a bare wall and a picture. And so it's kind of a little bit more ambiguous in the painting. Is the woman looking out the window, or is she looking at the picture, or is it both? Again, you kind of don't know. And this notion of a curtain, sometimes blowing in a breeze, sometimes not, you know, he uses that a lot as kind of like a little barrier, or maybe to imply that there's something, you know, beyond the canvas. This next drawing, although difficult to see because the image quality is kind of poor, but this is a study for one of the paintings, and all those little notes next to it are about light and color. And so I just kind of wanted to show you that you know, this is a common practice for some artists. Hopper's certainly not the only one that does this sort of thing. Makes these sort of notations in great detail in preparation for a painting. Again, this is something that's another side-by-side preparatory drawing and painting. And you know, you can, in the painting, certainly you can see the addition of the movie seats to create that sort of initial plane, and then it folds back to the theater space on the left, and then the vestibule where the woman is standing, the usher, and then it folds back into a fourth space, which is the stairwell. And you can see that he's made quite a bit of compositional change between the drawing and the final painting. So there's a few comparisons between these drawings and finished works. And what I'm interested in having you do this for the first part of this assignment is to draw yourself in a space. And I'm not going to define that too tightly. I want you to choose. I want you to choose a meaningful space, or a space that's resonating with you right now. I mean, that space might be outside even, because it seems like taking a walk away from other people is a way that we're coping with this situation. But it could be your bedroom, your studio, your basement, wherever you're feeling comfortable, or wherever you can really get a hold of the interior space or exterior space in a way that creates some meaning in the drawing. So I'm interested in having you do a portrait of yourself in this physical space. And I'm, you know, what the ultimate goal is to do a finished, elaborate drawing of fully developed with tone, rendered, you know, corner to corner, much like a painting. That'll be the ultimate goal. But initially, what I'd like you to do is to produce 4 small drawings that are compositional studies, and I really want you to explore the ideas. And I don't want you to think of these things like sketches. I want you to think of them as preliminary drawings. In other words, I want you to look at these Hopper drawings, and there's enough information in these Hopper drawings that you can understand the subject matter and what's happening in the frame. Sometimes I think students confuse the notion of a sketch with something that's, you know, 5 or 6 lines and is done in, 5 minutes, and that's all I'm going to do to study, figure out a composition. I really want you to put some effort into these drawings, much like we did the drawings in class. So this is just a straight up drawing by Hopper, and this is an image that he actually did as in printmaking as well too. And obviously it involves a nude figure and this blowing curtain and a bed, and Again, they're sort of like recurring motifs that he uses. So the parameters for the drawing would be that um, you could do a nude of yourself if you so choose. That is not a mandate. You can be clothed. You can costume yourself. You could wear a bathing suit. Whatever it is you're comfortable with. This is not really about um, the nude figure per se. It's really about the figure in an environment. So I'm interested in having you draw yourself, and you can scale yourself any way you'd like in this ultimate drawing. You could be small in the frame, and the room could be much larger. Most of Hopper's, the figures are fairly small, and the rooms are quite large. You don't have to do that, though. You could make your figure larger, and the room elements could be smaller. I'm just really interested in you marrying those two things together. Um, so I do think that one of the things I noticed about in grading for the midterms was that your in-class drawings, because we spent so much time on them, were far more far better than the homework drawings that we had done, and I do think it's just an element of the amount of time put into them. So we are going to, in this distance learning environment, you're going to put the same kind of time into these finished pieces that you do or did on the figure drawings that we did in class. So I'll elaborate more, and I'll type out a sheet that you can access on the Moodle shell with the with all the sort of elements of the assignment. But the first goal, 4 compositional studies, make them different. I think try a few ideas. Take a look at the supplemental material that I've provided as well. Hopper is one of those artists that also was highly influential of lots of other artists after him, including filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock, and most recently a very well-known contemporary photographer named Gregory Crewdson. I'm going to attach a link so you can see his work too, but he's a photographer. That doesn't matter. You'll see immediately the tie between the two, and sort of the feeling that's in the work. So I think that you can do a great job on this. You'll be able to shoot photos of your work with your phone and upload them to the Moodle shell so that I can see them, and I can give you some feedback as you're progressing, help you pick. But our goal, for this week is to do these 4 small, I would say 9 by 12 inch drawings that really study some compositions along these lines. And right at the end of this here, I have included just a couple of student drawings I found that utilize interiors and actually make the figure larger in the frame than Edward Hopper normally does. So these are examples of, kind of where the figure takes a more prominent role, but there is definitely an environment. And, there's lots of these kinds of images on the internet that you can look up. I just looked up self-portraiture, and I looked up some foreshortening. The first 2 here obviously have foreshortening involved in them. We might have even looked at these images when we were doing foreshortening. And then this last image, I think, is really kind of mysterious and sort of, haunting, and pretty great for a student drawing. And it utilizes 2 mirrors that are kind of tipped one's at least tipped in a kind of a leaning against something, so that it's got this kind of alternative viewpoint, and you have a double reflection. And we did explore reflection quite a bit in the studio this year. So, I want you to pull out all the stops here and really try to grab a hold of this. I'd love to see what you can do, and I'd really like to see you get your creativity flowing. So that's the end of my little spiel for now. I'll talk to you soon.